75 years of India's utmost terror against innocent Kashmiris who have, however, shown unmatched resilience for their just cause. The people of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir are awaiting the realization of their right to self-determination promised by the United Nations. But India continues its grave human rights violations to impede Kashmiri right to choose their future according to UN Security Council resolutions. Ever since independence, situation of human misery has substantially deteriorated, making the abuse and impunity against the innocently occupied Kashmiris a part of daily routine. Moreover, the Genocide Watch has already issued a genocide alert for Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and according to the Article 2 of Convention of Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, 1948, India's inhumane actions in Jammu and Kashmir are expected to be a part of larger plan of a genocide, which reminds of a regular practice of genocidal acts in the history, especially recalling the Jammu massacre 1947, the darkest day of Kashmiris, when 1 million Kashmiri Muslim refugees were uprooted and an estimate of 2 to 300,000 were massacred in Jammu region alone in August to October in 1947. Therefore, proceeding with our second day session, we will continue to discuss the abuse and impunity in Jammu and Kashmir occupied and the legal aspects to prosecute Government of India and its stationed war criminals before the appropriate international forums as well. Our honorable guest speakers are requested to analyze the current scenario in the light of India's history of perpetrating reign of terror through mass execution of Kashmiris in depth, as well as highlighting the significance of tragedy of Jammu massacre. Therefore, let's please have our first speaker, Ahmed bin Qasim. Mr. Qasim is son of two political prisoners, Ashik Hussain and Asi Andurabi, one of the longest serving political prisoners in Kashmir. Ahmed is from Srinagar, Indian administered Kashmir, and he is currently pursuing international relations and literature from Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad. Therefore, Mr. Ahmed, we would like to have you share your views over the extreme impunity and open abuse of the human rights in Kashmir. Thank you, sir.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Am I audible clearly?
Yes, you are audible, perfectly audible. Thank you.
Okay, first of all, thank you so much for having me in this webinar on Jammu Massacre. Now, when we speak of Jammu Massacre, naturally, all of us are completely aware of the fact that, hold on a second. Okay. So, when we speak of Jammu Massacre, all of us are completely aware of the fact that Jammu Massacre is naturally not the first massacre that the people of Kashmir have witnessed. When you speak about Kashmir's colonization, when you speak about Kashmir's occupation, you'll find this whole book. A book could be written about the amount of massacres that have been perpetuated against the people of Kashmir. But what makes Jammu massacre very important is the fact that one of the most important theorists on settler colonization, his name is Patrick Wolf, and in one of his works on settler colonization, he talks about how we have to make sure that we do not see settler colonization as a singular event. So we do not see it as a one-time occurrence. We do not see it as an overnight instance, but we have to see settler colonization as an ongoing structure. We have to see settler colonization as an ongoing process. And that's very important because what Jammu massacre does is that it disrupts this tendency to see the violence that we see in Kashmir today as a unique phenomenon, to see it as something that is exceptional, to see it as something that is unprecedented, or as if there is a rupture between Kashmir's past and Kashmir's present. So what Jammu massacre does is that it presents this continuity between the violence that Kashmiris have faced from the Indian state, which is a Brahmanical Hindu nation state. Now, this violence that the Kashmiris have faced, it may take different forms on different occasions, on different times. But there is an implicit and explicit consensus among the political actors of the Indian nation state that for Kashmir's integration with the Indian nation state to happen, the Muslims in Jammu and Kashmir have to be rendered into a minority. Now, Muslims constitute the main objects of Indian nation state's violence, and this violence manifests in varied forms of power. Now, the interesting thing is that when you speak of 1947, on one hand, you have Muslims in Jammu being brutally massacred. You have them being expelled in large numbers when you speak of the works of Alistair Lamb, Christopher Snedden, and all these different writers who have written about Kashmir. Hundreds and thousands of people were killed, many more were expelled. On the other hand, you see the instatement of Article 370 in Kashmir Valley. So you see two different approaches that the colonial state, that the nation state deploys at the same time. And there's not a contradiction between the two. We have to understand that the deployment of Article 370 in Kashmir Valley at that time was fruitful for India's colonial project in Kashmir, just as the massacre of Muslims in Jammu was fruitful. So all of us have heard this very prominent or renowned maxim, which is that the only good Muslim for the Indian state is a dead Muslim. And that's correct. And you see this manifesting in the case of Jammu massacre, where Muslims were brutalized and massacred and expelled. But at the same time, and this massacre, this maxim of the only good Muslim is a bad Muslim, it can take another form too. Another approach that Indian state has deployed in Kashmir has been kill the Muslim in him and save the man. So the Muslimness of Kashmiris, the Muslim character of their politics, the Muslim majority status, and the Muslim character of their self, that has to be erased. And they have to be given an alternate identity, which was given to the Muslims of Valley of Kashmir in the form of Kashmiriyat. Kashmiriyat was nothing but an alternate form of identity that was given to Kashmiris, which was meant or designed to erase the Muslimness of their identity and give them an identity that could then be integrated into the broader Indian social fabric or into the broader Indian nationalism. Now, in one of his books, Neve Gordon, who has written a lot about Israel's occupation of Palestine, he has written this book called Israel's Occupation. And there's an anecdote in that book that I would like to quote here. So when the Israeli forces, the Israeli military captured Jerusalem's Temple Mount, some of the soldiers had hanged the Israeli flag on top of the Temple Mount, on top of Masjid al-Aqsa rather. And when the defense minister of Israel, Moshe, who was a very hardcore Zionist, he visited this Masjid al-Aqsa. He was a hardcore Zionist, and when he saw Israeli flag there, one would expect that he would find no objections to that, rather he would celebrate that. But immediately he asked his soldiers to bring down the Israeli flag from the mosque, from Masjid al-Aqsa. Now, in the first instance, this looks like maybe Moshe was being generous, maybe he did not want to offend the sentiments of the people of Palestine. But the reality is that for Moshe, displaying the Israeli flag on Masjid al-Aqsa was an unnecessarily provocative act, because power is effective the most when it is invisible. So when you speak of India's politics in Kashmir, in the case of Article 370, Kashmiris were given this illusion. It was presented as a concession, but in reality, it was a shackle, because it was meant to give Kashmiris a false illusion of being free, at enslaving Kashmiris without them being conscious of their own enslavement. Now, what does Jammu massacre mean in all of this? The first thing that Jammu massacre therefore does is that it tells us, conveys to us this point, that the violence that we see in Kashmir is not a new phenomenon. Rather, you can chart a continuity between Jammu massacre and Bijbihara massacre. You can chart a continuity between the violence that happened in Jammu and the violence that happened in Hawal years later. So there's a continuity. But not just is there a continuity in terms of violence, physical violence, there's also an ideological continuity, and that is something very important. So as we see BJP ruling right now, there's this tendency among many people to see Hindutva as a phenomenon that has come into existence or that has emerged as a powerful ideology very recently after Modi's rise to power. But the interesting thing is that in the year 1925, and this was mentioned in a book that my father had written inside prison called Bang, in which he speaks about India's colonial project in Kashmir and the Brahmanical and the Hindu uh, aspect of it, which is very intrinsic to it. Rather, it constitutes India's colonial project in Kashmir. There was this prominent nationalist who was writing, Indian nationalist, Hindu supremacist, who was writing in 1925, and he was talking about what is important for the survival of the free, independent, sovereign Indian nation state. And he gave 4 points. He spoke about how Muslims, the first point that he spoke about was how Muslims have to be subjected to what he referred to as Shuddhikaran, which means that for many Indian intellectuals across thought spectrum, they don't see Muslims as truly Muslims. They see them as Muslims just on the surface, and they believe that they were all Hindus to begin with. Then they were either forcibly converted to Islam. Therefore, for the Indian nation state, the project of Indian nationalism to survive, all of these Muslims, there are three approaches. Either they have to be wholesale killed, massacre, and we saw this in the case of Jammu, where the population of Muslims was drastically reduced from 60% to close about 30%, or they have to be expelled, and we saw this in the case of Jammu again, in the case of Jammu massacre, or they have to be forced to assimilate into the larger Indic civilization, which is governed by Hinduism. So the concept of Shuddhikaran existing in 1925, coming from a prominent theorist who was not a fringe thinker, he was a very prominent Indian nationalist thinker. And you could see the current BJP, I'm talking about Lala, uh, exactly, I'm forgetting his name, but let me actually mention his name as well because it's very important. Yes, so his name was Lala Dayan, and he was writing in 1925. And you could see the current regime of BJP as his intellectual or spiritual descendants or his uh, successors. And he was writing in 1925. And the concept of Shuddhikaran, which is that Muslims have to be forcibly converted back to Hinduism, you see its present day manifestation in the form of the concept of Garvapsi. So there is a pervasive phenomenon among Indian intellectual circles, which is that the Muslims have to return to their homes, return to their origins, the origins again being that of Hinduism. So another thing that Jammu massacre, speaking of ideological continuity, shows, or we could say the other of Indian nation state, the Brahman Indian nation state, is the Muslim body. It is the Muslim body because when you speak of the massacre that happened in Jammu, it happened against the Muslims living in Jammu. It was orchestrated by the Dogra regime, which was completely a Hindu state in terms of its laws, in terms of how it ruled, in terms of what it saw as the purpose of its rule. And this was aided and abetted by the then emergent Indian nation state. And then you see the violence that has been happening in the valley of Kashmir. Both these forms of violence and both these instances and occurrences of violence have been happening against the Muslim body. So it's the Muslim body that is the object of violence, both in the case of Jammu massacre and in the case of in India's colonial violence in general. Otherwise, you have other uh, Kashmiris living inside Kashmir. For example, you speak of the community of Kashmiri Pandits, or you speak about the Kashmir community of Kashmiri Sikhs, but then they are not seen as outsiders or as killable bodies by the Indian state. So it's this Muslim who refuses to imagine his future with the Indian nation state who has to be domesticated, who has to either forcibly assimilate or he has to be expelled. These are the only two possible destinies for Muslims living in India and also Kashmir. Now, the final thing that I would like to say is that there is a very pervasive presence of Hindu nationalist thought in India's colonial project, as I made very clear. So Kashmir is not just important for the Indian nation state in terms of its economics, in terms of economic exploitation, in terms of political hegemony, but at the same time, it also has a very cultural or ideological uh, buttress to it. So there was this former RSS chief, and he was speaking about, and this is also written in Dabistani Mazahib, which is a book. And in his book Bang, My Father, he speaks about this. So for the Indian nationalists, Kashmir is not just important for its resources, or Kashmir is not just important for in terms of exploitation, but they also see Kashmir, and this is part of their theology. They also see Kashmir as a place, and I would like to say this in Urdu because that would make it more clear. So their aqidah is that दुनिया में जितने भी मुकद्दस मकामात exist करते हैं हिंदुओं के लिए, so all the sacred places that exist in this world for Hindus, all of those sacred places have a Qai Muqam, which is an alternative sacred place in Kashmir. So if the Indian nation state has Kashmir, they don't need to go for pilgrimage anywhere else. And we see this in the case of Amarnath Yatra, which the Indian state, the importance of Amarnath Yatra has grown over years. It has emphasized way more. If you look at the number of people who used to migrate, who used to come to Amarnath Yatra for pilgrimage before the 1980s or before 1970s, you would see a very meager number as compared to the number that you would see today, because the Indian nation state has created this image of Kashmir as a sacred place, the occupation of which is not just important to India's political project, but it is important to the very existence of Hinduism or the completion of Hinduism as a religion. And Mohan Bhagwat, I guess, he spoke about this when he was asked. He said that if Muslims cannot be comfortable with a non Muslim uh, invading or ruling Mecca and Medina, how can we Hindus be comfortable with a Muslim majority in Kashmir? Because they see it as a sacred place which is very essential to their very faith. And these are things that we have to understand and accept, and we should not try to erase this element of religiosity, Hindu religiosity or Brahmanical religiosity from India's colonial project, because otherwise we cannot make complete sense of the violence that happens against Kashmiris. So it's not Kashmiris who are subjected to violence. I'm repeating this. So Kashmiri Pandits, they also speak Kashmiri. They also eat the foods that many Kashmiri Muslims eat. Many of their dresses or many of their cultural moves, many of their cultural formations are very similar to that of Kashmiri Muslims, but they feel comfortable with India's sovereignty in Kashmir. And the Indian state does not see them as outsiders, as killable bodies, as the other, but it's Kashmiri Muslims who they see as outsiders. It's Kashmiri Muslims who are subjected to all the colonial violence. And again, it's Kashmiri Muslims who have led this resistance against occupation and India's colonization. So I guess lastly, I would just like to add a small point, which is that it's very important for us to remember massacres like Jammu, because one of the things that the colonial state does, it tries to distort your sense of history. It tries to make you feel that this struggle against occupation or this hatred that the people of Kashmir have for the Indian state. Maybe it started in 2014, maybe after Modi came to power, maybe it started in 2019 after the abrogation of Article 370, maybe it started after the 90s when Kashmiris took to arms for the sake of liberation, and the Indian state unleashed the violence that was invisible became very visible. The violence that was couched in the language of developmentalism, that was couched in the language of normalcy, became very visible on the streets for people to see in the 90s, after the 90s. Maybe it is because of that, maybe there's this alienation. But when you speak of Jammu massacre, which happened right in 1947, when this colonial project began, you understand that this struggle did not start 10 years before 10 years or 10 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, but it has its genesis. So our struggle against occupation is as old as the formation of Indian state in general. And rather, many would argue that it predates that because we have been fighting against the Dogra Hindu state as well. And many could see India as a successor of the legacy of the Hindu Dogra state in terms of its politics, in terms of its political theology. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your distinguished introduction on Jammu massacre, which proves structured hatred for Muslims of Kashmir and extreme aggressive mindset of the Indian political leaders. Moving further, according to certain international analysis, the crime committed on Jammu Muslim population was nothing less than an ethnic cleansing. There has been official silence for obvious reasons of the state's complicity in massacre of Jammu Muslims, but some foreign reports who were present at the tragic times were reported in most unambiguous terms. The reporter of the Times London on 10th August 1948 reported that around 200,000 Muslims were systematically exterminated unless they were escaped to Pakistan along the border. Proceeding with the discussion, we have Mr. Hassan Aslam Shah. He is an international lawyer based out of the Middle East and a graduate of Harvard Law School, USA. Mr. Hassan has written extensively on topics of law, including public and private, international law, and international relations. He has distinctive honor of being the first person of Pakistan to intern at the office of President of International Criminal Court, Hague. Hereby, I would request Mr. Hassan to analyze where Kashmir dispute stands today and what are the available remedies to prosecute such war criminals and why innocent Kashmiris continue to suffer this deadly conflict, which is a grave threat to regional peace and stability as well. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm honored to be present in your webinar today. And I specifically requested my good friend and brother Nasir to allow me to speak a little bit off topic today. The reason being that I feel that law can be a dry subject at times, and it doesn't really capture the attention of the people. And also because I do feel that I have a few things to say more about where the Kashmir matter stands today than to only talk about the violations of international humanitarian law being committed by the Indian state, which we all know is a fact. So allow me to just recap a little bit about where Kashmir dispute stands today. And the reason why I want to talk about this today is that because it's been a little more than 2 years since the abrogation of Article 370 of the Indian Constitution. And that was like a jolt for not only the Kashmiris who had already been suffering immensely under the brutal Indian occupation, but also for us Pakistanis, because we have a very close relationship with Kashmiris. We consider them, in fact, to be our brothers and sisters. Now, that was a jolt for all of us. And then we saw the Pakistani state springing into action. We saw the Prime Minister of Pakistan make a very important speech at the United Nations where he made a case for Kashmir. Since then, we have seen the Pakistani state take certain actions at international forums to highlight the crimes that have been committed against the Kashmiris and where India is planning to take this project. Now, the reason why I feel this is all very important is because after 2 years, we do feel or we do see the Kashmir dispute being taken to a certain level, which is, far more than what the state of Pakistan had done in the past. But I do feel that now we have reached a certain stage, where we all need to really make sure that we keep this matter alive at the international plane, at the international level, because there are many developments happening politically in the region which sort of dilute this matter. And we saw the recent changes happening in Afghanistan, where the Taliban came into power, and because of that, to some extent, Pakistan has come under more international pressure. We see some geopolitical alignments having taken place in the past. India has become very close to the US when it comes to strategic cooperation. the world is becoming more and more politicized. And as a result of that, we are seeing a blatant hypocrisy, I should say, at the international level, where despite clear violations of the law, the international community is literally turning a blind eye towards Kashmir, which is very, very unfortunate. And if you compare this with other regions where the West has an interest of stopping certain atrocities, then they are pretty prompt in those places. But when it comes to Kashmir in particular, there is this hypocrisy, there is this silence, this deafening silence, I should say, which is very, very heartbreaking. So now, because the Pakistani state also finds itself caught in a web of issues and problems, like the one I mentioned just now, the Afghanistan issue, its own economy, therefore, it is also not in a position to take Kashmir internationally as much as it should have done so far. And this is why I believe that the role of individuals and organizations like your organization becomes far more important than the past, because in this era of NGOs and this era of intergovernmental organizations, it is very, very important for us to provide such platforms where we can exchange ideas, where we can bounce ideas off of each other, we can refresh each other's minds about what all is happening internationally in relation to Kashmir. And I feel that our task becomes more important and more challenging now because of the political situation that prevails around the world. And this is why it is very important that we keep talking to each other, we keep exchanging ideas with one another. Now, one area where I feel Kashmiris and Pakistan as a state can benefit more is by creating a greater social media presence, which unfortunately I don't see happening. We don't see I mean, at least I haven't seen Kashmiri diaspora or the Pakistani state take the initiative of penning op-eds and articles in prominent international magazines and newspapers as much as it should be done. Now, when I say prominent international newspapers and media, I mean New York Times, I mean the Washington Post, those credible media houses, or at least those media houses which for which the Western diaspora has a soft corner, or they are not considered to be biased in atrocities. So whatever we may not have politically, whatever clout we may not have politically because of geopolitical reasons, we can make up for that by having a social media presence, because this is the time and age of social media, and we need to be a bit more aggressive on that front. We all know that your Twitter account keeps getting banned, or in by India, or on Twitter you're banned. But again, nobody is stopping you from having a social media presence. We need to be a bit more aggressive on that front, I believe. And I'll be more than happy to contribute in my own little way to highlight this matter internationally. And lastly, another thing that I have been talking about for the past 2 years, which I had also advised the state of Pakistan, was to flag the Kashmir issue at the UNGA, and to try and get an advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice on the Kashmir issue. And this is something that should have been done by now. Unfortunately, we have not done that. Because Pakistan is a stakeholder in Kashmir. Therefore, only because Pakistan as a state could have taken this matter up at the international level. The way to have done it was to get a simple majority resolution passed by the United Nations General Assembly, and to then refer the matter to the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion. Now, what normally happens in advisory opinions is that although it is not binding per se, it creates certain traction internationally speaking, because it adds to pressure. When I spoke to some government officials in Pakistan, I was told that Pakistan does not have that clout internationally. Pakistan does not have that reach. But I frankly don't buy that, because if you reach out to individual countries and you try and develop a rapport with them, then you can always reach that point after 1, 2, or 3 years, where you have significant backing at the international level to be able to take up the Kashmir dispute internationally. Again, to some extent, Pakistan's hands are tied, understandably, because Pakistan is also in the midst of a fact of lawfare. Pakistan faces its own problems, but a number of things should be done simultaneously, which would include social media, which would include, taking up matters at international levels, and lastly, let me just say this: that even if nothing happens, we still must continue to interact with each other. We should continue to highlight the Indian atrocities, and we should continue to join hands to discuss ideas. And I think we should not let the line go slack. The intensity, we have to make sure that the intensity remains intact. So with this, I come to the end of my short, talk on this forum. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And if there are any questions that anyone needs to ask me, please do go ahead.
Thank you very much, sir, for
let me a brief question. Since
Sure.
my brother and I have the same opinion on this advisory thing. I have been writing to very relevant quarters about invoking the ICJ, these advisory opinion, particularly on the August 5th issue. I see it as a student of law, as a student of international law, I see it a very good case. I have a very simple question, Brother Hassan. What stops government of Pakistan, to invoke? I feel it needs a will.
Yeah, Nasir, I don't want to speculate into this because I'm not a policy maker, but I feel there is, I feel, again, I could be wrong, but I feel that number one, there is no will. And I guess I am speculating now after having said that I won't speculate, but I think there is a lack of will, and we are perhaps a little scared about what could be the outcome. So again, I've mentioned this before that, when you frame the question, you have to frame it appropriately. So, and you have to be prepared to lose also. See, that is the beauty of, whenever you wage a war, whenever you take something up internationally, you have to be prepared to lose, or you have to be risk averse. I think framing the question appropriately could have made a difference. Now, for example, if I was to take it up internationally, I would couch it in the language of self-determination instead of couching it as territory, because self-determination as a right is something that is a universal right. It's not something that is, that can be diluted, or if you frame a question as a right of self-determination, you don't face the likelihood that others will question your motives or your bona fides in the matter. You can always say that, look, I'm not doing it for myself, I'm doing it for the people. So again, I think it could be a lack of will, and it could be perhaps not being familiar with the international system, being scared of the outcome. But I'm happy that we agree that this should have been pursued a long time ago.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for the analysis of the Kashmir dispute itself, and highlighting the role of social media that can revoke or invoke, the dispute at international or individual level. Proceeding further, we have a very special guest, son of the soil, Mr. Mubin Shah. He is the former president of Kashmir Chamber of Commerce. He was imprisoned by the fascist Indian government immediately after they robbed the semi-autonomous status of Jammu and Kashmir. Mr. Mubin is requested to highlight the ongoing heinous war crimes in Kashmir and Pakistan's role to take the case of the Kashmir to the International Criminal Court. Over to you, sir, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk and at the same time to learn from the other speakers regarding the legal status and what needs to be done. Because I have been based, my basis of my activism now, after being left from prison, has been to get justice for the people of Kashmir. The point is that we have for example, in the case of Jammu also, our narratives have not been correct right from the beginning. This Jammu genocide was put with the no, with the other killings which happened during partition, which was not the case in Jammu actually. It was a genocide of Muslims because of the fact that the killings were done at the behest of the Maharaja, in which there are eyewitnesses and people who were at that point of time present, and how they were, helped by the Patiala forces, which were already there in Jammu, and they were brought by deceit and were told that they will go to Sialkot and put in buses and killed. And unfortunately, up till now, neither the Pakistan government, neither anybody else has put this narrative correct. And it is up to us and other people, particularly with the help of social media, to correct this situation regarding this, genocide. Number one. Number two is also this thing that the narrative which is created by India regarding the killings of militants. There are killing of militants in Kashmir during this ongoing war is also to be confronted. Confronted in the sense that this, they are basically all of them, majority of them are fake killings. We recently even saw that a prisoner in the jail was brought and to an area in Poonch and killed there. And there is no proof that the other people whom they are saying that who had killed their armed forces were there in that place. So this is the story of all the killings which have been done on the name of fight against terrorism. The biggest advantage India took after 9/11 was this, that they labeled everybody as terrorists, and which a lot of them are our freedom fighters. You see, the problem has been that we have not been able to counter whether our people are freedom fighters or terrorists. The point is, there is no definition yet, clear cut, that what this is, so that India has taken advantage of that. So there's another point which needs to be looked into and fought over right from because the inception has to be corrected. The narrative has to be corrected in the world that these people are freedom fighters, and otherwise also these people who have been first imprisoned and then brought out of jail and killed, they're all fake killings. So now the point is, what needs to be done? I have a different opinion in because you mentioned of ICC. Because when I see as a layman, as not a legal personnel, I see the ICC. You have to be a signatory of a Rome statute, and then only you can be brought before that, which India is not there, and I don't think even Pakistan is, for that matter. So it is having a block there as such, technically. What other ways you can get India to hold them up to that, or an individual to that, is there are, as I read through the ICC, how you can go into it, and that is the personal thing or principle of complementary. That is the only legal way. But my suggestion, and it is open for discussion, is also this thing, that why doesn't Pakistan go to ICJ, not for this what Mr. Hassan was talking about, that they should get a reference from the government, from the United Nations, and to as advising. No, we all Kashmiris are deemed to be Pakistan citizens. They deemed to be Pakistan, all Kashmiris, whether on the Pakistan side or on the Indian side. The same way, for that matter, India can also say that all the Kashmiris are our citizens, because both of the countries tell that both sides are ours. Okay, so As a layman, it is only up to legal people who to understand this and see what is the way out. When government of India can go for Kulbhushan Yadav to the International Court of Justice, this is a this is an organization which India also is there and Pakistan is also there. And by the case of Kulbhushan Yadav, they have themselves done a case against Pakistan for an Indian citizen. So why Pakistan cannot do for a Kashmiri citizen who has been killed by India? The latest case also, the Mr. Zayed, who was in prison and killed. Why not on his case? Why not in all the cases of which they have killed up till now and who have been imprisoned? Both the cases. You see, the problem at this point of time in Kashmir, I know. I faced prison for 4 months. I know what I have gone through. I sometimes think about those people who have been in prison for years together. You know, and Mr. Ahmed is here, his father and mother both are in prison for so long. And what is the way out? What is the way out for them? You know, who will stop this Indian juggernaut? Who will make India accountable? It's only some international thing, international, and that is International Court of Justice, which India itself has gone first to defend their citizen. Why not? And Pakistan can go and defend me in this court because I am also deemed to be a Pakistani citizen. I have been all right from the day I have been left. And wherever I have got this opportunity, I have told this very categorically that if a Kashmiri goes out of India and wants relief, he should be given, first of all, without any questions asked, provided he is a Kashmiri, he should be given citizenship of Pakistan because he is deemed to be a Pakistani citizen. Number one. Number two, this is the easiest way to bring India to the court. They have themselves gone to the International Court of Justice. So I don't think there should be any problem. Whomever from the Pakistan side I have met here, wherever I am, I have given them this thing that please go to the International Court of Justice, or else these killings will not stop, the imprisonment will not stop, nothing will stop. You know, if they will go to International Court of Justice, when they can go for, these guys can go for Kulbhushan Yadav, why not? Why not for Qasim Fakhtu Saab? Why not for Yasin Malik? Why not for the people who were killed up till now? Why not? We want justice. So there has to be accountability. The only way by the internet ICC Pakistan can go is that there should be a UN Security Council resolution for crimes against humanity, for crimes against internal crimes, war crimes, crime. You see, these are the only points on which the international ICC can go, and you can go to ICC. And because both the countries are not under the Rome Statute, so the UN, the other alternatives to go to the UN Security Council. UN Security Council itself is not able to implement our right of self-determination. They are showing reluctance. They are dragging their feet. Why? Because there is power. Because it is such a thing that on one side you have India, other side you have Pakistan, one side you have now America, other side you have China. Unfortunately, Kashmir is trampled under this whole thing. And the thing is that before there was a Cold War. At that time, Soviet Union used to use the veto. Now, I am sure when the UN Security Council will say that we want to implement, there will be a veto from America, veto from France, because they have commercial interest with India. So the point is, you have this account to me and account to what I have seen for the last 2 years happening in Kashmir, and we know what we have gone through. The only way to at least stop what India is doing in Kashmir is to go to the International Court of Justice, because both the countries are represented there. One country has already gone for its one citizen, and I am deemed to be a Pakistan citizen till I am given the right of self-determination to determine my country. Once I am given that, then is something different. Till then, I am deemed to be a Pakistani citizen, and some people will say I am deemed to be an Indian citizen. That is his choice. But the point is, who is a party? Party is Pakistan. And I cannot go to the International Court of Justice. Only the country Pakistan can go into the International Court of Justice and put a stop to India. This is my only thing which I wanted to sort of highlight. And any questions, or if people want to ask anybody, I am ready to answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for such an insightful observation of genocidal intentions of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir and importance of International Court of Justice in the case of Kashmir. As we all know that India has always lamented the incident of Jammu massacre in 1947, calling it a black stain on India, a denial that counts as a symptom of potential genocide as well, which remains an alarming situation for the whole region.